Vipassanā Arises. One day, after I had practiced mental cultivation, bhavana patipati, and had gotten decent rest, it was around 3 p.m. It was a time I customarily came out to do walking meditation, cankama. I was seated, resting on the hut, kuti, porch. My eyes landed on a skunk vine growing beside the cankama path. Within the past few days, I had on 2 occasions told the novice, samanera, to remove it, but the skunk vine kept growing back in the same spot. During that period, wisdom had already been used to contemplate the ultimate truth, Dhamma, of reality, and I had known and seen the causes and conditions that have led to perpetual existence in the 3 realms. Upon seeing the skunk vine, I immediately internalized it as a Dhamma metaphor, ubaya. The skunk vine was just like my mind. It arises from causes and conditions, paccaya, that organically exist within itself. Whenever the bulb of the skunk vine is buried in the dirt, the contributing conditions kick in an intercausal chain reaction. The skunk vine bulb will extract from the dirt the nourishment it needs to feed its vines. Even if it is chopped down, that is merely addressing the end result. After the vine is chopped down, the fuel that generates life still remains in the bulb, so it will regenerate. Even if it is cut down 100 times or 1,000 times, the skunk vine will keep regenerating without end. If the bulbs were dug up from the ground and were set out to dry under the sun's rays, or they were burned to ashes with fire, the skunk vine bulb would never regenerate. That is, the cause and conditions of the skunk vine would have been completely obliterated. Likewise, the mind that is regenerated in different rebirths does so because the mind is led there by the fuel of defilements and desires. Once defilements and desires have been obliterated from the mind, different rebirths, pavachati, will have no way of arising again. In that moment, it was as if the mind were utterly empty, like the world and Dhamma had detached from one another and were completely separate entities. The mind had no attachments to anything. At that time, my mindfulness and wisdom were extremely courageous and confident. When something was contemplated on, there was comprehensive clarity in all aspects. The models, ubaya, upon which wisdom was applied were the same principles that had already been contemplated. The difference, though, was that the mind completely accepted the truth from wisdom. Whatever was contemplated on, the mind would know and see according to the principles of reality in an exhaustive manner. Both comprehensive clarity and dissolution of doubt occurred simultaneously. The crux was that desire, tanha, was what led the mind to rebirth in existences, bhava, small and large. Desire leads to suffering. There are many causes and many conditions working together. The desire for happiness is the chief cause. It is a very refined, latent desire, and it effortlessly leads the mind to delusion without the mind even realizing it. That is, the desire for sensual pleasures with which humans that populate this world are so obsessed. This is because they are considered pleasurable preferences. Whatever one derives pleasure from, whatever one loves, or whatever one has attained to one's satisfaction, are considered happiness. Little do people know that happiness is the cause of suffering. Take, for example, the 5 sensual pleasures, kamaguna, of form, sound, scent, taste, and touch. These 5 sensual pleasures are things that exist in the world, and they have been consumed to the point of becoming habits. While they are being consumed, it is considered pleasurable happiness, but what follows is suffering. So people struggle and intensify their efforts at procuring more sensual pleasures, and more suffering follows. That is how happiness from sensual pleasures causes suffering to result. Once there is great obsession with sensual pleasures, one will consequently always be trailed by the shadow of great suffering. That moment, I was replete with incredibly refined wisdom. I knew and saw the taproot of desire very clearly. There was another type of desire that caused the frequent cycling through rebirths in this world. It is a source of great pleasure. Everyone in this world yearns for it, namely, desire for merit and wholesomeness, punya kusala. I apologize to everyone here, as this is not something that should be written here, but it must be written. Just consider it my own personal matter. You, the reader, should hold off on following in my footsteps. Once that day arrives, you will know and see for yourself what the refined desire that causes delusion is like, why we humans have been reborn in this world until we are unable to find our way out, and why, even worse, we keep cycling through the three realms. Sense desire existence, kama bhava, is an existence, bhava, where there is delusion of sensual pleasures, kama guna. There are two types of kama, or sensual desires, vattu kama and kilesa kama. Vattu kama refers to all material possessions that we have, money, gold, food, and every type of object to which we hold ownership rights or accountability. It can be something that is alive, like an animal that belongs to us by convention, sammuti. Both of these are called vattu kama. They are procured, utilized, and consumed only in this human world. These possessions are not owned by anyone outright. They are merely possessions we rely on temporarily, while we all are still alive. If the mind is fooled into believing that these things belong to us, so much so that it is swept away by attachment and clinging, it will suffer. This is because these material possessions are subject to impermanence, anicca. There is bound to be change according to causes and conditions. The assumption that these things eternally belong to you is not true. You should only consider them temporarily yours. In a few days or years, you and your various possessions will most definitely part ways. Sometimes you are still alive and your possessions meet their doom before you do. Other times, the possessions are still there, but you have died and left them behind. This is also possible. Those various possessions then fall to your children and grandchildren to use and rely on. But even your children and grandchildren cannot truly be the owner of these possessions. Everything is merely acquired for temporary use. Even royal emperors who possess immense merit, punya, and perfections of character, bharami, and assume worldly treasures as their own, cannot truly take these worldly possessions for themselves. They are only to be owned and relied upon while you are alive. Soon you will part ways. If the mind clings to these worldly possessions, once death arrives, the mind that is attached to and worried over the possessions will return to be born in order to continue to care for them. Instead of going to rest in heaven, saga, it can't go. Or sometimes it is reborn as a hungry ghost, beta, to guard over the treasures. This is also possible. Thus, don't be obsessed with worldly treasures. They may bring you mental happiness, but it isn't that great. Mostly what they bring, or nearly all that they bring, is mental suffering. It is the responsibility of the practitioner to constantly think about this in order to lessen the attachment within the mind. Kilesa kama refers to love and lust in the realm of passion, raga. The agents that raise passion within the mind are form, sound, scent, taste, and touch. They can be applied in constructs, sammuti, that arouse the mind. Despite defilements, kilesa, and passion having taken root in the mind, if form, sound, scent, taste, and touch are not used to construct, sammuti, notions that gratify the defilements of passion, it is like red coals that are still burning. If fuel isn't applied to the coals, the flames will not rise. Whenever fuel is poured onto the coals, the flames will rise with great intensity. Likewise, though there is passion in the mind, if form, sound, scent, taste, and touch are not used to construct, sammuti, or fabricate something that amplifies notions of love and lust, the mind will not be aroused or have preoccupations, aramana. The world's sentient beings are deluded by sense desire existences, kama bhava. Partaking in attachment, pleasure, love, and lust has become a habit. The mind has become intoxicated by them. It is hooked on sense desires, kama, so hooked that it is addicted. Humans regard all of this as ordinary. They consider it normal. Isn't that kind of understanding self-serving? Whatever gratifies your defilements is considered normal, right? So this is what it's like, being deluded by things that are normal. That is why we have been reborn in sense desire existences, kama bhava, for many eternities up to the present time, and will continue to be deluded by normal like this for perpetual future rebirths. Within sense desire existences, kama bhava, there is another type of existence we humans strongly desire, heavenly existence. The sense desire existence, kama bhava, in heaven is referred to as divine, tipa. There is enjoyment and enchantment with divine things. Heavenly beings partake in sensuality, kama, through the mind. The infatuation with sensuality there surpasses even that of the human world. Heaven, saga, is a place of merriment. Anyone who lives there upgrades their delusion. Little do they know that heaven is still subject to impermanence, anicca. All heavenly beings do not want to fall back down to a human rebirth, but they cannot remain there because the merit and virtues they have cultivated are finite. Once it is time, they must be reborn as a human again. No one will be able to remain in heaven for perpetuity. Therefore, in kama bhava, an existence in which beings are obsessed with sensual pleasures, kama guna, it is difficult for them to realize that they are deluded. That is, deluded by their own merit. Little do they know that merit, punya, and demerit, bapa, are a pair and cannot be separated. They are rings that are linked together. If the merit ring is strong, the mind will have some happiness. If the demerit ring is strong, suffering arises in the mind. Thus, a single mind experiences both merit and demerit in the sense-desire existence, kama bhava. Another type of merit results from meditating to a point where the mind, citta, is calm in fine material meditative absorptions, rupacana. After dying, these meditators are reborn in the fine material realm of existence, rupa prama. Another type of merit results from meditating to a point where the citta is calm in immaterial meditative absorptions, arupacana. This is merit of a refined level. This merit is unable to cancel out demerit. It merely overpowers demerit and prevents it from rising up. This merit is born from desire. There are two types of desire: desire for demerit and desire for merit and wholesomeness, punya kusala. Merit and wholesomeness will only orbit within these three realms. Demerit similarly orbits within these three realms. Once you know and see, through wisdom, how desire engenders merit and demerit, and you know how desire leads the mind to cycle within the three realms, you must find a method, ubaya, to destroy desire. When desire has been completely obliterated from the mind, the path of cycling, vatacaka, within the three realms, will have essentially been severed. Once wisdom knows and sees according to reality in this way, there are no existences, bhava, that can be inhabited and relied upon. The mind is not attached to anything, which is why the mind is considered to be vacant or empty. The mind does not hold anything as significant, nimitta. That is why there is a vast emptiness within the three realms. There is nothing mysterious or hidden from this refined degree of wisdom. My mind felt different. Since the past, it was like my mind had been weighed down by the heavy burden of the body and mind, tatu khanda. There had never been a day where my body felt light, or my mind felt light. The mind could not remain still. It would turn toward defilements and desires, always flowing along the stream of the world. The mind constantly turned toward defilements and desires without ever having time to take a break. It would take in preoccupations, aramana, that were pleasing or displeasing, and regularly bring about distraction, frustration, and sadness. There was never time for myself. Use wisdom to contemplate things that are impermanent. Contemplate suffering and the cause of suffering, whether it is physical suffering or mental suffering. Use wisdom to teach your mind at all times. The mind's delusion with sensual pleasures, kama guna, has caused wrong views and wrong understandings to arise. It clings to sensual pleasures in an inseparable manner. Now that the mind sees the suffering, harmful consequences, and future perils inherent to sensual pleasures, it will be scared and afraid to attach itself to sensual pleasures again. It will distance itself from attachment and yearning for old existences. Use wisdom to contemplate and review the trends of defilements and desires until the mind knows that there is only suffering that arises. There is only suffering that exists as the mind's eternal partner. As for the wisdom model that provides information with which to teach the mind, there must be actual evidence that can be rationally and profoundly believed. Once the mind receives this true information, the mind will be ready to accept the truth and ready to decide decisively and instantly not to yearn for defilements and desires any longer. The mind realizes that defilements and desires have tricked it into being deluded, and has caused it to be pulled along the stream of the world for such a long time. It has suffered and been tortured by birth, aging, sickness, and death this entire time. If the mind is left to continue to follow defilements and desires, there will never be a way for it to avoid this suffering. It will only drown in suffering caused by sensual pleasures without ever being able to come up for air. It will only become more of a perpetual slave to defilements and desires with every passing day. In situations like this, there is no one who can help you. You must rely on mindfulness and wisdom, and rely on your own ability. That's it. Be worthy of the phrase, "One is one's own refuge." Why would you rely on others anyway? Since forever, defilements and desires have dragged my mind out to the great worldly conventions, Maha Sumuti, and left it stranded there. There was never free time for myself. I have always been under the power of defilements and desires. However it was in the past, that's how it is in the present life. However it is in this present life, that's how it must be in the future rebirths. That is, the mind has been brainwashed by defilements and volitional thoughts, sankhara. That's why it is tamotama parayano, in darkness and bound for darkness, without end. There is only infatuation with worldly conventions, samuti, that is without limits. Even when it causes suffering, harmful consequences, and future perils, it is understood to be a normal issue. Any disappointment and suffering are deemed normal issues. There is no wisdom, paññā, to fix these things that are normal. Eventually, it will continue to float along the world's currents. It is difficult to become aware and watchful, so things are left to follow the ignorant mind's direction. Who knows how long it will be until the mind becomes aware? The mind has greed, the mind has anger, the mind has lust, and the mind has ignorance. And it is left to have greed, to have anger, to have lust, and to have ignorance, because these things are considered normal. The mind has ignorance in desires, avijja tanha, and defilements in mental formations, kilesa sankhara, and this is considered normal. There is no mindful wisdom to study the cause and effect of this normal at all. It is of the paraparamat level. It is a mind that is barren and has no chance of absorbing any Dhamma whatsoever. It is a mind that the Buddha cannot grace. It is tamotama, a mind that is in darkness and bound for darkness. There is no wisdom to fix the problems within the mind at all. If it were a lotus flower, you could say it hasn't even grown a knob on the lotus rhizome. If it were a horse, you could lance it all the way to the bone and it would still refuse to run. Therefore, regarding issues as normal is the way those without wisdom make excuses all the time. Using normal as an excuse plays into the hands of defilements and desires. What a shame. During that period, mindful wisdom, faith, sattva, effort, and knowledge and realization within the mind were all replete and fully primed. When I contemplated any universal truths, Satya Dhamma, my mind was comprehensive and exhaustive in its wisdom. There were no residual doubts that would cause the mind to be bewildered, wonder, or hesitate in the least bit. Everything was known and seen according to reality in a very clear, transparent manner. There was nothing that was mysterious or hidden about the path of cycling through rebirth, vata samsara. Regardless of how complex something was, there was an understanding of it all. Only those who do not have mindfulness or wisdom will continue to be lost in the path of cycling through rebirths. Despite having been born and having died in the cycle of rebirth before, it is all regarded as a dream. There is no need to pay attention to that which has passed. They are merely past travels. What is the point of thinking of them when they are all already in the past? Therefore, all of this being born and dying within the three realms are affairs of merit and demerit that sprout from desire. The term lokavitu, which the Buddha proclaimed as having wisdom to clearly know and clearly see within the three realms, refers to the world of sense desire, kamaloka, the world of form, rupaloka, and the world of formlessness, arupaloka. These three worlds, loka, are simply tourist destinations for all of the world's sentient beings. It is called vatacaka, the place where sentient beings cycle through rebirth. In some existences, there is happiness. In some existences, there is suffering. It depends on the effects of merit and demerit the individual has cultivated. Those who have cultivated meditation, samadhi, to the point of meditative absorptions, jhana, will be capable of controlling or subduing defilements to a degree, enough to have some happiness. But once the power of the meditative absorptions fade, a rebirth within the world of sense desire, kamaloka, as before, is warranted. Defilements and desire will express themselves in the mind. There is love and lust in sensual pleasures, just like everyone else. They have husbands, wives, children, and grandchildren, just like all other humans. Therefore, those who are reborn in the world of form, rupa loka, and the world of formlessness, arupa loka, do not escape suffering. That being so, why should we be enraptured and deluded by these three realms? Use wisdom to contemplate such that you know and see these three realms in a way that your mind knows and sees the impermanence and the change within them with clarity. One who is to escape the three realms must be replete with mindfulness and wisdom that is astute and sharp. They must understand the phrase, sapphe sankhara anicca. All conditioned things are impermanent. There is nothing that is certain. There is birth and there is change and decay. Nothing stays still. Whether the conditioned thing, sankhara, arises organically in nature or arises from human creation, whether it is a sankhara with a life force, vijnana, inhabiting it, or without a life force inhabiting it, it is all subject to change. Whether it changes quickly or slowly depends on the causes and conditions within that sankhara. Even the three realms fall under the control of all of these sankhara. Therefore, one should not be attached to the notion of physical conditioned things, rupa sankhara, or mental conditioned things, citta sankhara, belonging to oneself or being oneself. Whether they are internal sankharas or external sankharas, near sankharas or far sankharas, coarse sankharas or refined sankharas, they are all things that are impermanent. Even merit, demerit, benefit, and harm fall under the absolute control of all of these sankharas. None of these sankharas can be a permanent refuge. The world's sentient beings suffer and shed endless tears because they are enchanted by these sankharas. Even when the sankhara is supposed, samuti, to be ourself, or supposed, samuti, to belong to us, it is merely a supposition, samuti. Once that samuti changes, suffering arises in the mind, does it not? Thus, suffering in the mind can be generated from many causes and conditions, and though each of them may vary, the result is the same, suffering. Suffering congregates in a single place, the mind. Happiness also congregates in a single place, the mind. Suffering is not desired by anyone. The aversion to it is evident in animals as well. Though it is not desired, once it arises, it still must be experienced. This is because the cause of suffering has already been generated. Everyone must similarly accept the results. Once the cause of suffering, whether generated intentionally or unintentionally, produces results, it will definitely impact the mind. Whether that impact is small or large is contingent on the causes and conditions that were generated. There are numerous external causes and conditions that engender suffering in the mind. Even the world's natural seasons can cause the mind to suffer. For instance, when it is too hot, when it is too cold, when heavy rainfall causes flooding that impedes travel, all of these can cause suffering. When the body is in pain or sick from some disease, even the various postures, iddhyapada, that we use every day can cause suffering. Standing for too long, walking for too long, sitting for too long, lying down for too long. Even though they are matters of the body, they can affect the mind and cause suffering. Thus, change postures frequently. When you see forms you dislike, hear sounds you dislike, are accused or slandered, are scolded or cursed out, suffering arises in the mind. When you desire something and that desire is not fulfilled, suffering can arise in the mind as well. When there is upadana, the clinging and attachment in the five aggregates, panchakanda, of form, rupa, feeling, vedana, memory, sanya, mental formations, sankhara, and consciousness, vijnana, as being self, atta. Regardless of that person's status, they will be impacted by mental suffering. That is why the mind is where all suffering congregates. One who is to break free from the three realms will not continue to negotiate with defilements and desires. will not be friends with defilements, and will not be friends with desires. In previous existences, I had already lost out to defilements and desires, and this life will be my final birth. What do defilements have left with which to bargain? Mindfulness and wisdom will not accept any conditions whatsoever. Defilements and desires have tricked me into believing the 5 aggregates were self. My mind has been conned by defilements and desires. But now, I have the mindfulness and wisdom to recognize the ruses employed by defilements and desires. I will not be deluded into thinking that rupa, vedana, sanya, sankhara, and vijnana are self any longer. My mind used to rely on these physical phenomena, rupa dhamma, and mental phenomena, nama dhamma. This life will be the last life in which I rely on the 4 elements, jatu tatu, and 5 aggregates, panchakanta, because the 4 elements and 5 aggregates must still arise and cease according to the causes and conditions of this world. Thus, whatever is of a nature to arise is of a nature to pass away. The mind has been deceived by these things that arise and cease for innumerable, unquantifiable rebirths. However it was in previous rebirths, that is how it is in the present life, or in the future rebirths, it will still be the 4 elements and 5 aggregates, as before. Whatever rebirth the 4 elements and 5 aggregates arise in, that is the rebirth in which they must cease. Once one has the mindfulness and wisdom to clearly understand and realize that the 4 elements and 5 aggregates arise and cease over and over, the mind, citta, will become dispassionate and resigned over the 4 elements and 5 aggregates without any residual concern whatsoever.